Não, é ruim. Confesso que é ruim, né? Por mais que
Guy. He has the streak to solve matches, to play well in great matches, and as he's doing now for Everton. I expect him to grow up, to keep developing in his career.
Tráfico y nada, paciencia y tranquilidad para nada y salir un poco antes para llegar puntual al lugar.
Did you know that football, just like a lot of items you use, was manufactured in China? This might be difficult to believe because the Chinese do not seem to be experts in the game. But a long time before the Europeans and South Americans became football experts, the Chinese made some kind of football from hair and leather feathers, and they used it to keep themselves busy when they felt bored. The game they played with this football was called Cuju. Although Cuju is quite similar to modern-day football, it wasn't associated with the many rules and regulations that modern football, as we know it today, is associated with. Football might have been made in China. However, China was just one of the places where a form of football was played. There were several other forms of football, and some of them were in Greece, Rome, and England. However, they had to wait until 1863 for the birth of modern football. So, one could say football started wherever they choose. But football as it is played today started in England. We'll see more of this in a moment. But in the meantime, please like and share this video. Also, kindly subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this. Modern-day football was born on the 26th of October 1863, and this is simply the birth of English FA. The establishment of the English FA led to rules being written. Before these rules, football could actually be played with hands and feet. However, after rules were written, using the hand in football games became prohibited. Although the English FA was the first of its kind, it was only a short time before other countries had something similar. You see, the British Empire ruled the world. So, just like English, football soon became a universal sport.
Foi um ano bem movimentado, né? Com coisas ruins, com coisas boas, com aprendizado, né? Tornei um pouco mais experiente, né, do que o normal.
Football was spreading like fire in the Harmattan. However, there wasn't a body to unify the various FAs until 1904 when FIFA was established. The birth of FIFA came at about the same time as some of the biggest clubs in Europe were being set up. Although FIFA at its establishment was a global phenomenon, it was only made up of 7 countries. England was looking to become a part of this body, but France opposed it. This was because it basically wanted each country to join as a federation. However, Britain wasn't looking to do this. The 4 countries that made up Britain at the time wanted to join as different federations. The World Cup, which is now a basic part of football, was never really a part of the plan. This might be difficult to believe, nonetheless, FIFA wasn't established to put together the World Cup. So, how did the World Cup become a thing? Well, you see, the Olympics was already huge before football came onto the scene, so in the 1908 London Olympics, football gets featured in the Olympics for the first time. This was supposed to be a big deal for football. Sadly, it wasn't. At the time, professional footballers couldn't feature at the Olympics. As much of this was a problem, it basically was only a problem for professional football players. Amateurs could take part at the Olympics. Interestingly, with time, football became bigger and many leagues, which used to be simply amateur, became professional. This meant lots of people who were once amateur footballers had become professionals and could no longer take part in the Olympics. At this point, FIFA knew it was time to put together a competition for professional footballers, and this birthed the World Cup. Football had become a thing, but it was still far from the big business it is today. But that wasn't a problem at the time, as lots of folks who took part in the game did it out of passion. 26 years after the establishment of FIFA, the World Cup was held in Uruguay. Well, maybe it's easy to assume England should have hosted because football as we have it today was started by the English. But that didn't happen. You see, Uruguay had just won the Olympics, so it seemed just logical that they hosted the World Cup, which was announced at the Olympics. Although the World Cup was for everyone, only a few countries participated. This was quite normal, as only a couple of countries were in FIFA. But You see, the low participation in the World Cup wasn't necessarily because only a few countries were eligible to participate. Things turned out this way because of the distance between Europe and South America. The players couldn't fly to South America, they could only travel by ship, and this just didn't seem like something the Europeans were ready to go through. Although Europe didn't seem interested, 4 European countries finally made it to the first World Cup in Uruguay. Uruguay won this World Cup, which they hosted after beating Argentina 4-2 in the final. Both teams had their balls and didn't want to play with each other's balls. Well, in the end, each half was played with a ball from the other team. The next World Cup was hosted and won by Italy. It also broadcasted on radio for the first time, and Uruguay opted out because Europe refused to participate in the tournament it hosted. The World Cup is a big deal and should have continued to be one. Sadly, that wasn't what happened. Some guy from Germany felt he needed to police the world, so he started a war and the world was affected. Football wasn't left out. Of course, those who ran football couldn't pretend like the war wasn't their business. As a matter of fact, they were hugely affected, as the guys who were supposed to be shooting balls into goalposts were actually still shooting. Sadly, this time, they were not shooting balls. They were shooting guns. Unlike the shots in football that bonded them, these shots drove them apart and led to the loss of lives. The Second World War was quite a dark age of football, but it didn't last forever. The Nazis were soon defeated, and the world was quite back to where it was before the war. Football, too, continued.
We have to be smart. During my career, I changed a few stuff in the way I played, but this means that the other stuff you lost, the other stuff you're getting more experience. You know, the criticize is always part of the business.
Football had a couple of talented players already, but none was as exciting as the young teenage Brazilian who was in the World Cup for the first time. This 17-year-old, who many would later consider the best contender of all time, was playing for his first World Cup. But featuring in the 1956 World Cup at age 17 wasn't the only thing that stood him out. Scoring a World Cup goal to become the youngest player to score the World Cup also made him very special. But it got even better. Pele scored in this World Cup finale and went on to become the youngest World Cup winner in the history of football. This record still stands, and it doesn't seem like anyone's going to break it anytime soon. Lifting the World Cup at age 17 was a huge achievement for Pele, but he wasn't quite done yet. He went on to win 2 more World Cups, and this cemented his place as the greatest player in the world. Also, after winning their 3rd World Cup, Brazil were free to keep the trophy. Brazil keeping the World Cup trophy after winning it 3 times was a major highlight of the 1970 World Cup hosted by Mexico. But beyond Brazil keeping this trophy, this World Cup was broadcasted in color on TV. That's not all. To ensure that fans watching matches on TV had a great experience, Adidas introduced the Telestar ball to the world. This ball featured iconic white and black designs that will never be forgotten. That's not all. The 1970 World Cup was the beginning of yellow and red cards. After Pele led Brazil to 3 World Cups, for a moment it seemed like football was all about Brazil, but something else was happening in Europe. You see, Europe had developed its football architecture significantly, and this included the European Cup, which, as we know now as the Champions League. The maiden edition of the tournament featured 16 teams and was won by Real Madrid. The Los Blancos could have passed the medal to a different team, but they were not done yet. They went on to win a second before letting other teams taste what winning the European Cup was like. And if you think Madrid are a team that suddenly became interested in having the best of the best on their side in the early 2000s, you're wrong. Back in the day, they had an idea of bringing together the best players in Europe into one team. While Real Madrid were dominant in Europe, England had become a major force in football and ended up winning the 1966 World Cup. This is perhaps an era English football fans want to get back to, as England hasn't won the World Cup since 1966, but I'm sure they want to witness football in an era without cards. This is because in 1966, yellow and red cards were not part of football. The 1960s and 1970s were great for English football. They had all the best players in the game on their side. This man was none other than George Best. Yes, lots of people in this generation perhaps do not consider him as talented as some of the most gifted players of this generation, but that doesn't mean he was any less gifted. Best had a great career and retired just at the time Italian football was becoming a big thing. The 1980s will always be remembered as a great period for Italian football. Italy won the World Cup in 1982, which had 1 billion viewers around the world and featured 24 teams. That same year, Barcelona brought Diego Maradona to Nou Camp after a fee of 7 million euros. Italy's World Cup win was definitely a major achievement for the Italians, but winning the World Cup wasn't the only reason Italy dominated the 1980s. Some top Italian clubs like Juventus, AC Milan, and Inter Milan were beginning to do very well in Europe, and they just made Italian football look good. But there was an extra factor. Italy's rise to global football dominance came at a time when football started getting televised, so it was easy for the world to recognize their success. The rise of prominence of Italian football was great, and the World Cup win isn't even its high point. The high point was the arrival of arguably the greatest player of all time, Diego Maradona, to Italy. You see, when it became common knowledge that Maradona was going to Italy, the football community perhaps thought he was going to any of the biggest teams in Italy. But that wasn't what happened. The Argentine legend landed in the city of Naples, where he put pen to paper for Napoli. As one man, he led Napoli to glory and helped them win their first league title. This cemented his place as a legend in Italy, but the man actually did more than just win a Serie A with a weak team. He won the 1986 World Cup with Argentina. In 1986, Maradona's ability wasn't in doubt, but his ability alone wouldn't have helped him win the 1986 World Cup with Argentina. He had to cheat in a match between Argentina and England. Maradona handled the ball with his hand and was able to score the only goal of the match. This was in the quarterfinals, and with this, he was able to make a smooth ride to the finals, eventually winning the World Cup. In the same year that Maradona won the World Cup with Argentina, Sir Alex Ferguson, who is one of the most successful coaches of all time, became Manchester United's coach. This was an era that lasted 26 years and produced several trophies. Ferguson's time at Manchester United saw United become a dominant force in Europe. Also at the time, English football became really attractive. With Ferguson in charge, Manchester United won a treble. Of course, they were the biggest team in England. However, they were not necessarily the biggest in Europe. Real Madrid and Barcelona dominated Spain, and Milan were king in Italy.
No, no tengo nada especial, simplemente la cambio con el que se da en el momento. Es verdad que me tocó jugar contra equipos donde hubo argentinos, y generalmente con los argentinos solemos cambiar, pero me pasaba también cuando jugaba en Europa. Y nada, porque generalmente muchas de las veces nos conocemos, ya nos cruzamos anteriormente, y bueno, siempre es lindo cambiar camiseta con algún compañero o algún conocido.
¿Y qué haces con la
10 years after Sir Alex Ferguson joined United, Zidane joined Juventus and became one of the best players in an era that seemed to be dominated by Brazilians. Zidane was the best playmaker on the planet, and this became evident 2 years later when France won the World Cup, which they hosted. But winning this World Cup wasn't a walk in the park. They had to go through Brazil to win this. Going through Brazil, a team that had won the World Cup 4 years earlier and had an array of stars, was big. But even more difficult was the fact that France had to beat a group of Brazilians with Ronaldo on their side. You see, just before the 1988 World Cup, Ronaldo was the best player on the planet. He was young, but playing against him was difficult. Sadly, his status as the best player on the planet wasn't good enough to get Brazil the 1998 World Cup. The Brazilians gave it their all, but it was really France's time. In the final match, Zidane scored 2 goals, and that was good enough to bring the World Cup to France for the first time. time. While the French were not quite done, 2 years later they went on to win the Euros. They were on top of the world at this point, and the football community thought they would go on winning for a while. Sadly, they were a huge disappointment in the 2002 World Cup after they lost to first-timers Senegal. The World Cup was eventually won by Brazil after they met Germany for the first time in the World Cup. Ronaldo Nazario scored the 2 goals in this final and went home with the Golden Boot. Although the 2002 World Cup was Ronaldo's time, he didn't do it alone. A certain young player called Ronaldinho, who later went on to become one of the best players in the world, contributed immensely after he came in as substitute to score a stunning free kick against England's David Seaman. Ronaldinho, who has been at PSG, eventually went on to become a Barcelona legend and laid the foundation on which Lionel Messi built. Everyone knows Messi's story and his rivalry with CR7. However, before this became a thing, Ronaldinho's Brazilian teammate Kaká, who was actually at the 2002 World Cup, was the best player in the world for a moment. He went on to become a Galactico, but winning the Ballon d'Or just before CR7 and Messi was the highest point in his career. And this is the perfect time to subscribe to this video if you haven't done so yet already. Now, just before Kaká became a force in European football, Real Madrid was busy assembling the best players from all around Europe. They had Zidane, Paul, Beckham, Ronaldo, Figo, and Carlos. With these guys, Madrid were able to win the Champions League in 2002. However, they had to wait until 2014 to win the next Champions League. The arrival of the Galacticos was the introduction of financial power in football, and Madrid were not the only ones playing this. A year after Madrid won the 2001-2002 Champions League, Roman Abramovich, a Russian billionaire, bought Chelsea, and this transformed the club into a big one. Roman bought Chelsea in 2003 and brought a couple of big players. A year after, Porto, under the leadership of Jose Mourinho, won the Champions League against all odds. With this, Chelsea signed him, and that birthed the successful Chelsea the world knows today. The idea of converting an average team into a major force by spending money probably started with Chelsea. However, it didn't end with the West London team. PSG, Manchester City, and more recently Newcastle have followed this path, and this might not be ending soon. After the days of Ronaldinho, Zidane, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, and Figo, it didn't seem like the world of football had so much to offer in terms of talent. But 2 young men proved everyone wrong. These guys are Messi and CR7. At the beginning of the rivalry, it basically seemed like, but this rivalry, which lasted way over a decade, birthed 13 Ballon d'Or awards. 8 for Messi and 5 for Ronaldo. Beyond producing several Ballon d'Or awards, the Ronaldo-Messi rivalry made the El Clasico a lot more intense than it was before they came onto the scene. Both Messi and Ronaldo are currently out of Europe, which is now being ruled by Mbappe, a French player who came to the scene in 2018 and won the World Cup as a teenager. 4 years later, he almost won the World Cup again. He even scored a hat-trick in the World Cup final. Sadly, it was Lionel Messi's year. At the moment, Mbappe is the biggest player in the game. Many hoped he would share the stage with Neymar, but the Brazilian left Europe a little too soon. This means Mbappe has to share the stage with Haaland and Vinny Jr. In a couple of years, the likes of Lamine Yamal and Endrick should become world-class and dominate the beautiful game of football. But we can only hope injuries do not stand in their way of making actual impact in the game. And this is where we draw the curtains today. So do you think football is perfect as it is, or should there be a couple of changes to the rules? Kindly let us know what you think in the comment section below. Also, before watching the video on the screen, kindly subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of our videos.